Today I'm discussing folk horror, what it is, why it's important, some recommendations. What is folk horror? Well, as you can see, I have All the Haunts Be Ours, Volume 1 and Volume 2. These are from Severin that include many examples of folk horror, popular compilations. The Savage Hunt of King Stock, which I'll refer to, and my personal favorite, The Wicker Man. This is an excellent film with Christopher Lee. What are some guideposts? What are some ideas you can hang your hat on that relate to this genre? Well, one, and something you may not think about, even if you're really familiar with this genre, is the idea that the landscape, the actual literal land, plays a large role in the conflict. We see this especially in a film like The Savage Hunt of King Stock, because there's this idea that sounds a lot like Witcher 3, the video game, where this hunt of this king rides endlessly on and haunts a town over pastoral hills. Well, in that case, it's more swamps and it's not so pretty. But the same thing is true in The Wicker Man. We have an island and the people are attached to the land. Part of the conflict is that the land isn't producing enough fruit. The landscape matters a lot. Now let's think about something like Rosemary's Baby, by contrast, where the characters are stuck in an apartment. It's a little bit more contained, self-contained, claustrophobic. That really isn't the case very often with folk horror. Now, as a result of being in small country settings and pastoral settings and outdoors, we often have a great sense of isolation and loneliness in communities that build around isolation and isolated beliefs. And that is where a lot of the legends, the myths, and the horrors tend to come from, going back to The Savage Hunt of King Stock. The legend that our protagonist is trying to figure out more about as a student or as a professor, however you want to look at that, is this like kind of insulated town in this pastoral landscape. And usually, although I would say almost always, there is either a supernatural element that is pulled from these legends, these myths, ghost stories, whatever, or the people at least believe it to be true. So, for example, The Wicker Man is not much of a supernatural tale, although it hints at it. Whereas some of the films in these sets, All the Haunts Be Ours, might actually have cryptids in them, or creatures or ideas that relate to the supernatural. So depending on the director, the source material, that may or may not be there directly. It could just be a belief system. And another part that, and what I think is just kind of the best of these, is that there's always some kind of morality and how it clashes with tradition. I think it's more than morality itself. In other words, for example, in The Wicker Man, there was a Christian tradition on this island at one point, and now there's a pagan tradition, but the pagan tradition might be asking things of its inhabitants that aren't moral, the same way that Christianity before it might have. It might be asking for violence, immoral violence. So often in these stories, there's an inner psychological conflict that relates to morality and how it might clash against values of the community, particularly if it's small, isolated, and so forth. And all these ideas work together in a very, let me say, unpolished way. And that's not a criticism. These are often not slick, glossy films. They look rough and beat up. They feel like they're pulled right off of an old VHS shelf. You know, you think about the movie The Ring, how there was a VHS that just kind of someone found. It has that kind of feeling. And that can be both a strength and a weakness when you're really thinking about it. It looks cool and it works well for the style of horror that these films are often going for, which is earthy and eerie and creepy and like something you shouldn't have stumbled onto, and that's part of the appeal. But then sometimes, I have often found in folk horror that the films can be uneven in terms of narrative and plotting, and you know, they're not necessarily films you go to because you think they're like the best written or the best crafted overall stories. And sometimes they feel quite unfinished, and budget, you know, can have certainly interfered a lot with that. I wanted to talk about this because I want more people, people that are strictly horror fans who haven't delved into folk horror should do that. And then some of the people who watch my content who are really into stuff like the Criterion Collection and sort of fine art films, I want people like that to start having an eye for stuff like this. I encourage you to dive into folk horror if you haven't, such as with one of these packs from Severin or one of these two films. There's a lot out there, and I wanted to throw this video out there as a springboard for those of you that might have ideas about folk horror films you wanted to share. And if you could, and you found any of this content to be helpful and you wanted to click the like, thumbs up, I'd appreciate it. And tell me your folk horror recommendations, subscribing to Cody in the Cinema.